Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play. And that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program.
In the spotlight is Jennifer Rosner. She is the author of the novels Once We Were Home and The Yellow Bird Sings, the latter being a National Jewish Book Award finalist in debut fiction. Her other books include a memoir called If a Tree Falls, A Family's Quest to Hear and Be Heard, as well as a picture book called The Smitten String. Her books have appeared in a dozen different languages, have been translated into a dozen different languages. Her short writings have appeared in the New York Times, the Times of Israel, The Forward, and other publications. In addition to her writing, Jennifer has taught philosophy. She holds a PhD from Stanford and a BA from Columbia. She lives in Massachusetts with her family. Jennifer Rosner, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Your new novel, Once We Were Home, it's a very heavy theme. Talk to us about the gist of the book, and also where what motivated you to actually write on the topic.
Yeah. So overarchingly, the novel is about children who are moved, displaced, and or possibly stolen during wartime. And in the particulars of this novel, the children's cases that I deal with are children who are moved during World War II, during or in the wake of World War II.
And this is based on a true story. Your novel's based on a true story, is that right?
It is. I mean,
Okay.
it's what it is rooted in true historical cases of these events. So basically, it started when I had been writing this other novel, The Yellow Bird Sings, which is about hidden children of the Holocaust. And I was interviewing a man who, said to me, by the way, my wife has a really interesting story. And so I sat down with her and started asking her to tell me her story. And basically, she told me that during World War II, she was in a labor camp in Siberia. And when she got back to her native Poland, just 3% of Jewish children had survived. And most of them had survived in Christian settings with assumed identities. And she became part of this mission to reclaim those children back into Judaism. And sometimes that happened with negotiations and with offers of money and other things. But sometimes the family who had harbored the children just did not want to let them go. And I think that, the people who were trying to reclaim the Jewish children had lost so many, there was so much annihilation that they felt it was this moral imperative to get them back, and sometimes resorted to tactics that included like just taking them from the fields and things like that. And I was just really surprised by this part of history that I had not known anything about. And that was the first type of case that I ended up grounding some of my fiction in, the case of Jewish children hidden in Christian settings who were then essentially stolen back to Judaism. But then I found other cases, and the more you look, it's just crazy how many cases there are of child stealing. So there was a case of a kind of famous case in France of these boys who were hidden in a convent, and when surviving relatives showed up and tried to claim them, the church actually stole those kids and baptized them and took them on the run. And then there was this huge number of Christian children who in Poland were stolen from their families to be Germanized during the war. I mean, I ended up weaving together these stories of 4 children, 3 different kinds of cases of child stealings. But honestly, I had to narrow it down. There were others. And it just makes you realize, like, when you look at history, how children have been moved around based on, some ideologies of adults, and it's happening in Ukraine. There's just so much
I
of
was going
this.
to mention it's happening in Ukraine right now, where the Russians are taking Ukrainian children and indoctrinating them as Russian children, is my understanding. Is that yours as well?
Yeah, and that case has some parallels, especially to the Germanization case that I mentioned, where, there might have been this sense that the, Polish children would be better off raised as Germans, right? Because it would be the superior race in their mind, in the
Right.
mind of a Nazi. And so, children just, being moved. And that was kind of the overarching thematic thing, and it just became very personal, not just when I met the woman who was an operative for the redemption of Jewish children, and also did a ton of research afterwards, talking to historians who interviewed many of these operatives and children, etc. But yeah, so I mean, that is kind of the gist
I
of
didn't
it.
even know about this from World War II. How did you find this out? I mean, or you have just were reading history, and this was part of the history that you read, and it captivated you?
No, I mean, it really started because I met this woman who actually stole children, or, as she called it, reclaimed or redeemed or returned children to Judaism. So I actually met someone who was an operative for
Wow.
the redemption of Jewish children. And I hadn't even known that this was like, I really hadn't known that this was a thing at all. And then I ended up finding a historian in Israel who studied this very, in depth with, she published a book with Yad Vashem Press called Dividing Hearts. And she, in the process of writing that, interviewed many of the people who did the work, and also many of the children who were moved. So that's how I, began the research and reading those testimonies, etc.
Gotcha. Now, are you, well, let me put it this way. Let me preface it by saying the late, great Philip Roth used to be called a Jewish writer, and he bridled at that. He said, no, I'm an American writer who just happens to be writing about Jewish people. Is Jennifer Rosner a Jewish writer?
I don't think so. But two of my novels, and actually my memoir too, do have, kind of, they're rooted in Jewish history. The next thing I'm writing has nothing to do with Judaism. And I think in a way I'm just a really personally driven writer, because, one thing I was going to mention is, I was looking at these cases of children who are moved, and there's these questions of like, what is a family, and who do these children belong to, etc. And this comes from a very personal place too, because my husband and I are like we're the hearing parents of two deaf children, and when our children were born and they were diagnosed at birth, it's a very specific thing when you have deaf children, because in most every circumstance where someone births a child, the child just naturally inherits the language and culture of their parents. But when a hearing parent has a deaf child, there's this question about who should raise them and where they belong, in the sense of, should they be raised in the language and culture of their parents, or should they be raised in a different language and culture, kind of being brought into the deaf community and learning ASL or sign language wherever you are living. And that's not my native language. And so it was very personal, honestly. Like, even though this is rooted in history of Jewish children, and not only Jewish children, also Christian children, but during, World War II that, very seriously affected Jews, the emotional heart of the novel may actually be very personal, and have more to do with our experience as parents of children about whom it was questioned where they belong, more than anything.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, that connection. So your next novel is, you said you're already working on one. What's the theme of that one? Can you say, or is it not ready for?
I can try, because
Okay.
I'm only at the very beginning of getting some traction on this new work, but it is actually sort of a direct address of the debates within deafness. But it is a novel, and I think it's a love story, but it's very complex because of a lot of the questions of, the political fractiousness in the deaf and hearing, between the deaf and hearing worlds. So I'm not sure I can say anything much more coherent about it, but I'd like to try to highlight the kind of both valid and invalid reasons on all sides of that debate and sort of show the ways in which it's a bit of a microcosm of the political fractiousness that's generally afflicting our nation. So if I can pull this off, you'll see it as a specific case of something kind of more universally going on.
So would this be a novel or a nonfiction book?
It's a novel.
It is a novel. Okay, so you take big themes, you take heavy themes and write about these things. I think a lot of people write fiction because they see it as freedom. It's a lot of freedom away from any particular, well, let's just call it freedom. They can write about what they want, but you are actually taking these big topics. And did you, from the onset of your desire to write, know that you wanted to do this sort of novelization of real issues in the world? I mean, clearly novels contain real issues, but you're picking some very personal type stuff. Did you know from the beginning this is what you wanted to do, or did this just impose itself?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that in a way it has to do with, what brings someone to their desk every day. And you know what I mean? Because, writing a novel it's a lot of perseverance and endurance and persistence. And I think for me, there has to be a pretty strong psychological driver to get me to go there. So I know that there are people who write, really entertaining novels and they're really super fun to read. And, I don't know if I would have the drive to go and sit down and write those. I think when I'm writing, I'm probably working out something more personal. And so I think that's kind of how it's come about. I think that, I started by writing memoir that really was working through a lot of the things we were dealing with as parents of deaf children. And not only of that, as a person who, initially thought I was working on, questions about whether my daughters would hear, and then realizing I was really working on a question of whether I would hear them and whether I really had hearing models in my family. And, so I think it's a lot of self-discovery for me. And then, one of the details I learned when I looked at we found in a family tree that there were these deaf ancestors we didn't even know about, and we are carrying recessive genes, et cetera. So all of this was discovery. And one of the most profound details I learned was that I had these two great aunts who were deaf sisters, just like my two daughters are deaf sisters, but they lived in the 1800s in this little shtetl. And someone in the family said that at least there was this lore that these great aunts at night in the darkness, they would tie a string from their wrist to their baby so that if their babies cried or fussed in the darkness, they wouldn't see it, but they would feel the tug on their wrist. So they'd wake up to care for their children. And this became like the innovation of hearing and listening and, mothering and connection that I really needed, I think. And that kind of string metaphor runs through my novels. In The Yellowbird Sings, when there's a violinist that's a string instrument, and she calls out for her mom in the night, in the darkness. And then in Once We Were Home, there's also some string imagery essentially through the roots of trees. And I don't know, I think it's that I'm always kind of working through kind of deep personal material in some way or other, expressing and wanting to express it.
So do you see writing as cathartic?
Yes,
or is that an overstatement?
do. No, I really do.
Okay.
I find that it is, I just feel healthier writing. I feel like I'm expressing things that I probably couldn't even have articulated if I hadn't sat down to write. And they're also being sublimated. They're not so direct. You don't always know what you're doing until after you've done it. I don't know if I even know that there's something deep going on or personal going on until after I've worked a while. And then I say, oh, that's what I'm working on. And I don't always know going in.
You talk about the string between the deaf mother and the baby. You talk about the string instrument. Obviously, when we write, we don't want to be overly explicit. We don't want to deliver to the reader on a shovel. We want to be subtle. We want things to emerge. But do you have any fear or reservations about the connections or the nuances or subtleties not connecting with the reader, that they're not really getting that? Or do you feel like you deliver it in a strong enough fashion? By strong enough, I mean overt enough fashion that they're going to get it, but at the same time, I'm not being heavy-handed.
Yeah, that's a great question. And every writer always has to toy, kind of work with this type of thing where they are conveying messages or themes, but they don't want to do it so explicitly that it's spoon feeding or something. Um, and I think it's also really this balance of meeting the reader so that their own associations can also play a role in their experience, and you're not dictating what their experience is, and so that you're doing your part and they're doing theirs, and it's kind of a joint project together. You know what I mean? But I think that I probably tend to be on the understated side. I'm a quiet writer in a certain way, but I think that I just think that, a careful and thoughtful reader will kind of pick up on those themes even when they're not, too heavy-handed. And maybe there will be readers who are rushing through and they don't pick it up, and but we can't control that part. All we're trying, we try to create this piece of art in a way, and then the recipient will view it as they do. And so yeah, it's a lot of letting go. I've felt too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But then that's also what editors are for. You have an editor,
Yeah.
and that editor would let you know if it's kind of too amorphous or it's too vaporous. I don't I know it because you told me what was in there. And which is really one of the great things about hearing from a novelist, that they're able to talk about a book in a way that enriches the actual reading of it. So let me talk about your children for a second. Are your daughters twins?
They're not. They're 3 years apart.
3 years apart, both born deaf.
Yeah.
What is the biggest misconception that you would share with people about having to raise deaf children? Is there one that you would say, or would you say, everything you think about, that the travails of trying to raise a deaf child is exactly what it is? It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of maybe heartbreak. Certainly in the beginning, you probably wanted to be able to communicate verbally with your daughters, and that wasn't quite possible.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is I think I don't know if I'd say it's a misconception or whatever. I think that especially when you're a new parent of any baby, there's a lot of different expectations, and then as we all continue parenting, we realize that we would be best off letting our expectations go and trying to embrace the particularity that's in front of us, and
Yeah, that's a great
the
point.
idiosyncrasy and all that. But with our daughters, at first it was frightening because we're hearing and we don't have the same experience as a deaf person, and so there was this fear of like a chasm between us. Like, how would we share the world in the same, what I mean?
Yes.
And the thing is, though, that there's so much more. Their perceptual systems are so rich, and also people are gathering information in so many different ways. So like initially when my first daughter was born deaf, and I was actually a trained singer, but I like could not sing because I felt like she wouldn't hear it, and it felt very stingy and sad, and I just stopped singing. And with my second daughter, I knew already after a while that of course she would get it. She wouldn't hear it, but I'd drape her body over me and I would sing, and she would know it all because she would feel it. She would watch me. Like our relationships are so much more than any one single sensory perception. And it took time to learn that or understand that or get out of my frame or whatever. But
those are great points. Yeah. Go ahead and finish that thought, though.
I was just going to say, in the end, there's this big debate about how one might raise one's deaf child. And, we made, after a lot of complex thinking and research and whatever, the decision to give our children hearing technology, and they are in the hearing and speaking world, and because we learned of their deafness at birth, they got their technology very, very early, and so there were never any delays really, and they've done beautifully, and it's all they're really kind of ensconced in the hearing speaking world. But then, just like everyone who struggles with sense of identity, when they take off their sound, they're deaf, but when they have their sound on, they're hearing. And so there's this weird feeling like they're neither hearing nor deaf, or they're both. They're like a hybrid hearing deaf person, or that type of thing. And the issues about like where one belongs and who's one community, what's a community, and all those things are, I think, part of the human condition, and maybe a little bit accentuated for one of my daughters in particular. But I also think that like we all experience all these things, and we have different things that bring us to those existential questions and to those, questions about being human and being in community with others, and all those other things, are raised maybe more acutely in certain moments in one's life, or because of particular things one's dealing with. But ultimately, we all end up there thinking about that and trying to find our place in the world. And I don't know, maybe that's where the misconception question could be answered, which is that, you think it's really just you or just your family, but in fact, this is the human condition that we're all working through, how to connect to each other.
Yeah, you make such great points there that there's so much more to communication. And, we're so used to talking to one another to try to communicate. And it's amazing how often here we speak the same language, we talk to one another, and there's misunderstanding despite that. And yet there's so much stuff. I mean, there's that great quote, "What you are screams so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying." I mean, that's kind of a negative quote, but at the same time, we pick up so much extrasensory material, or sensory material, except that it is not just auditory. It's not just listening to somebody talk. And I suspect that these things that you're saying, Jennifer, find their way into your writing. I mean, it informs your writing in certain ways. It sounds like something that was illuminating. And no, I'm putting words in your mouth right now. Did you find that the whole experience and thinking in terms, I mean, writers are supposed to think in terms of all of the senses when you're writing. But at the same time, I read so much writing that is really all about just saying it.
Yeah.
Did it enrich your writing by having this experience that you're having with your daughters?
Yeah, I mean, it totally changed me as a person, as a parent, as a writer, as a thinker, and I mean, maybe parenthood without deafness would have also done that. I don't know, because I don't have a control case, but one thing that's really true is that initially, when it felt like grief, like what our child might miss, what our older daughter, especially before they did, before the hearing technology got on their ears and everything, I would take walks, and you'd hear the ripple of the stream, or the wind in the leaves, and you'd think she's not hearing that, and you ended up paying so much attention in a grief state to all the things she wasn't hearing. But then when she got her technology, and the same with my second daughter too, we would pay so close attention to everything in the sensory world, so that they would become great listeners. Like, whether they could hear as well was one thing, but whether they were listening really carefully. I think in the end they listened much more carefully than hearing people. And so we would point out everything, the sizzle of an egg and the water through the faucet, and pointing it out, and I hear it, and then you start paying attention to your sensory world. You pay attention in a way you never did. Usually you filter out all that stuff. It's just noise, and as a writer, it's made such a big difference to me, because I can really be there in every sensory state, in a very explicit way, because I was sort of training my children in that way. And
By having had
very valuable.
I hear you. So with them having their hearing cut off, couldn't they have easily said to you, well, you're not looking at things like we look at as closely, and you're not feeling things as closely, because when one sense is cut off, the others are heightened, is my understanding, because you go with what you've got. And so
there's such
they
adaptation.
were probably making visual observations that were much more detailed than what.
Exactly. I'm sure
Yeah,
they see things we miss all the time. And in fact, we used to joke because you could never hide anything in our house. Like I would try to hide presents and they would know exactly where they were. And they, even really young, there was no conversation I could have with my husband, like even turned around. I mean, they notice every expression. They notice, because they're watching, really carefully, and they have
right.
great, kind of perceptual systems all told. And so it is true. I think that, whatever, hearing people probably privilege sound in a way and are missing a lot of other information.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie The Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino?
I have, but it was a really long time
Well,
ago.
specifically what I'm talking about now, in this case, he's blind in that
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
And the guy who he's with, I forget who the actor is, but he makes just a facial gesture to
Yeah.
a server. And Al Pacino, although he was blind, and it's completely believable to me, he said, "Oh, don't do that." It's like he
Yeah.
knew. You don't
Yeah.
have to see it to know that it's happening, that
Yeah.
somebody's doing something. There's just so much, again, sensory material. It's in the air,
Yeah.
that even a blind person knows when you're making a gesture to just cut this off, or leave him alone, or don't pay any attention, whatever the case may be. You mentioned technologies. Is it bone conduction technology that your daughters use?
No, one of my daughters has bilateral cochlear implants, and that's not bone conduction. This is like electrodes that are
I'm
woven,
familiar.
yeah,
Yeah.
into the cochlea. And my other daughter wears two hearing aids, so they have different hearing losses, but both would need technology to be able to hear spoken language, and they can.
So if somebody, when the hundreds of thousands buy Once We Were Home, and they hear Jennifer Rosner's voice, the authorial voice, what are they going to hear? How would you describe your voice to the reader? Or how would you describe the reading experience that a reader is going to have, or
Yeah.
that you hope they will have?
Well, it was very important to me to occupy the child's point of view in Once We Were Home. So there's four different characters. Three are young when the novel begins, and I want it to be that you're right there with them, and seeing and hearing and feeling the world through them, and um experiencing the ruptures they experience, and experiencing the kindnesses they experience, the whole gamut of emotion as they struggle, through growing up after being moved in these ways. They struggle with identity, with the sense of belonging, with the nature of home. And then one of the characters you meet, she's already 28, and she stays at that age throughout the novel, and the children, kind of all the other three, meet her at that time frame. It's sort of this woven story, and one of the stories sort of begins at the end point, if that makes any sense. And anyway, so yeah, it was very important for me that the point of view be from these children, because I wanted to really examine the psychological ramifications of adults moving children around, and how they can ever figure out how to reroute after that kind of rupture has happened.
So you were channeling a child's voice, or you in a child's perspective?
Yeah,
In other
and
words, this is not, you wouldn't say that you have then a voice that is consistent throughout the things you have written, because in this case, you're occupying a child's point of view.
I mean, I'm not just occupying a child's point of view. I'm occupying Roger's point of view, and Oscar's point of view, and Anna's point of view, and Renata's point of view. Very specific children with very specific, personalities, and then vision, views on what's happening. And that was important to me too, because especially in the case of the Jewish reclamation attempts, for some of those children who had, depending on their age and their memories, being taken back into Judaism could have a comforting aspect, because even though they lost their parents, they identified with Judaism in a certain way. But if you were just 3 when you were stowed with a Christian family for your safety during the war, and then you were taken back when you were 7, and this is really the only family and you're being taken to what, like something foreign, and it's just very hard to adjust. And when I read these cases, the historical cases and these operatives who had moved children, some of them had followed their children all the way, for years and years after, and saw the kind of psychic damage that some of that occurred, some of that took place with. And similarly with the kids who had been Germanized, there's a woman who worked to repatriate Germanized children and then saw what rupture it was to return them. And so kind of following the psychology of this experience, and staying really close in character, so like close to these particular children, so that you would develop empathy for these particular characters. You know what I mean? You'd identify with this experience from their point of view. That's kind of what I was doing. So, I was at a book talk recently where someone said, wow, what I loved about this was that you were really team child. And it's true, I was, but it's interesting because I was also trying to capture the adult perspectives of the people, because they're also very complex. Like, in the case of a young, the woman I met, for instance, a young Jew who saw such annihilation, it felt like this moral imperative to save those children. And then even in the case of like clergy who stole children, some of them were really worried about their safety, and others were genuinely worried about their salvation. We may look at it now and think it might have been misguided, but at the time, a lot of people earnestly had these views, and children were sort of moved about in accordance. And so I do try to also capture the kind of, I don't know, the moral blurriness, but also the complexity of all the points of view.
Yeah, I get it. So when did you know you wanted to write?
Yeah, well, so I had been a philosopher before having kids. I had finished my doctorate in philosophy, and I was about to, I had been doing a bit of teaching, and I was going to go on the job market when my daughter Sophia was born. And
well, let's back up just a second. I actually want to put in front of that question why you study philosophy. What was it that brought you to a major in philosophy, and then going as far as getting your PhD from Stanford? So quite an investment there in gray matter and money. So what about that? Why philosophy?
Yeah. I mean, there's probably 2 answers to that question. There are these fascinating questions in philosophy, and I got really hooked into them. But I'll tell you I'll tell you one answer. It's very funny, I guess, or not really funny at the time, but funny later maybe. But I dated a guy. He was really my first boyfriend, and we dated for 3 years, and it all fell apart when I learned that nothing he had said to me was true. Wow. Like, he had lied about where he grew up and what his parents did and where he went to college. I mean, he lied about everything. And I didn't know.
And over time, you just found this out. It revealed
itself all at once after 3 years of going out. It all unraveled one day when it all came undone. And
did he eventually admit to it? There
was
no reason why.
There was no denying it, really. I mean, I think he had felt very bad about who he was, and he kind of made up a story, and then he couldn't quite get out of it, and so he made another. Like, it just, one lie led to another, and he didn't know how to get out of it, and then it just kept going. And honestly, like, I just ended up being drawn to like how you could ever know another mind, and how you could ever know anything, since you can be deceived. And it brought me in the door to the nature of skeptical thought, and the nature of knowledge, and the nature of truth. And so that's one very personal way I got in. I also think my mind, I was just drawn to questions that are like this. But that really drove me in the door there to the philosophy hall at Columbia. and
Wow. And
and
what age or grade level were you at when you were dating this young man?
yeah, I mean, I met him like at the end of high school and dated him for a couple, I was in college for a couple years dating him. He wasn't at my college, but we were together until all of this fell apart. And yeah, so I got really interested in the nature of knowledge and can you have justified beliefs, and what is the nature of truth and stuff. And then I went into graduate school working on you know the the ways in which a self can be alienated within, so that you might have desires that you don't want. You want something but don't want to want it, and is that still who you are? Or what is the true self? So if you have a desire but it goes against your values, is the value your true self, or is your desire your true self? So when people ask, when people say things like, in vino veritas, like what you say when you're drunk is the true self versus the thing you say in your rational, reasonable time, is that your true self? And how do you work through the fact that we have all this in our in our one self, etc. So yeah, I got interested in that, and in the kind of kind of messiness, ambivalence, and ambiguities there.
Well, how did it unravel? I realize this is a personal question and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but what was the event that made it all just unravel?
I mean, what really happened was I was trying to find him, and I called a friend of his and said, I've been trying to reach him and he's not there. He's not answering at work. And this guy who had known us together, like he was his friend, he had known that I've been in this relationship with him for years. He said, "Look, Jennifer, I just have to tell you, he doesn't actually work there." And I was like, "Wait, what? Of course he works there, And he was like, "No." And he basically told me, and I said, "Well, what about," and I started asking everything, like, didn't he grow up on this street? And didn't his parents do this? And didn't he go to this college? And it was all no, no. And then this friend said, "I'm hanging up with you and I'm going to call him and I'm going to tell him I told you everything." I mean, he was having trouble watching this go on and on and on for years anyway. And so, yeah, that's how it happened.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. You must have just been blown away.
I could barely pick my head up. I don't think I knew one could even, I mean, it didn't occur to me that you could lie about these basic things, right? I mean, what would lead a person to do that? Yeah.
Maybe trying to get elected to Congress or something like that, as we've seen recently.
Exactly. It is happening,
Oh,
isn't it?
boy. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's get to the writing. Oh, go ahead. Finish that
Well,
thought.
I was just going to say, circling back to how I became a writer, is that, I had been in the philosophy, and then I had Sophia. And, for the first time after doing a lot of, very academic writing, I took a journal out just to try to understand my feelings and thoughts about the deafness journey and our daughter, and how we, all this stuff about our family. And that was the first time I had ever done creative writing. So I had just been, finished philosophy grad school, and I was a new mom, and we had the deafness in front of us, and I just started journaling, and it opened this whole new world, and I loved it. I mean, I found it so nourishing, and I loved this personal writing that was also really intellectual in various ways. And it changed everything. Like I wanted to do it. It's just, I just found it much more pressing than the, very theoretical and abstract work I was doing.
Wow. That's a great story. Both of those are great stories. So what about the process? So when you write now, what's your process like? Are you a morning writer, an evening writer? Are you catch as catch can? And
yeah,
well, I don't know if some writers write on the move. Some writers have their place. It's their place, and that's where they always write. What's your process like?
Yeah, I mean, it changes. It really has changed a lot, because for a while I was writing while I had little kids in the house. So I was writing while they were in school. And then as soon as they were home, I wasn't writing, or I was writing at the dining table in between, like that. And then now our kids are both in college, and it's so different. I have time, real time. And, I didn't, for a long time, I didn't have an office. Then I got one, but I was sharing it with our rabbits. Then now I have an office that's just my own. And, there have just been so many different, so many different configurations, especially with COVID when everyone was home again, that kind of thing. But now, I don't know, my process is that I don't pressure myself to do something specific. I know there are people who say I have to write this many words a day, I have to do this many hours a day. I try not to do that because I don't really work so well in that forced kind of regimented way. So what I've done is said, I need to touch that material every day. I need to go and sit with it so that it continues to simmer. So even if one day it's not a great yield, I will have been thinking about it. When I go to bed, I'll wake up maybe with a new idea or something. So that's one thing I'm trying to be very concerted about, is to at least address, touch it every day, whatever that means. And then it's interesting too, because different projects have just emerged in different ways. So The Yellowbird Sings was very long in the making, and then once we were home, worked through much quicker. And this new novel, for a while, I couldn't even write it sitting at my desk. I had to go for walks, and then I'd have ideas. Like if I sat at my desk, I'd have no ideas. So then I'd go for a walk and I'd start thinking about, stuff would come. So I'd be writing it into the notes app of my phone. I mean, I don't know if there's one way for every project, or at least once to get traction on it. And then maybe once you have traction, you can go back to the sitting at the desk and saying, I have to put this many hours in or something. But I think it varies, and I'm trying to respect that, and that each process is different, and that, each one is its own new mountain to climb, and you don't know the path. So.
But, that's a great piece of writing advice. I've heard other people say it in different ways, but that, touching it each day, just sitting with it. One person who has been on the podcast, he said he committed to writing one word per day.
Yeah.
And he said, once you open your laptop and
you're not going to write.
One time he said, I put one word down just to keep my vow. He said, but any other time I'd be there for at least half an hour, because it's not worth even, once you open the laptop, you're going to stick with it. And there was another person, a gal, who said, I commit to just 15 minutes a day, because if nothing else, it's exactly what you're talking about, that I just need to reconnect with the copy and where I'm at. And, as you were suggested, your mind goes to work on it while you sleep oftentimes, and you wake up in the morning and you've got an idea. There's an epiphany, or wow, I figured out the ending. How did you end up?
And also, I should say something, which is that when I was writing my dissertation, I was like just doggedly sitting at my computer for hours and hours and hours a day. I didn't want to move. I had to, and finally I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. And I'm going to work on it a few hours a day, and I'm going to take walks, and I'm going to read novels, and I'm going to do other things. And when I finally made that new change, it was done in 6 months. It was like, the more I concertedly tried to work on it, the more stunted I became. Whereas when I gave myself some air and space and breath, it flowed out better. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I get it. Wow. How did you end up getting published then? That's the big struggle with so many writers. Are you the kind of person who went to book expos? Were you part of a writers group, or did you just one of those lucky ones who wrote something, sent it to an agent, and they said, let's talk?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say, I really am humble about it, because I know that the best books are in someone's laptop or in their drawer, and this industry is just ridiculous in terms of getting it out. You know what I mean? It feels so, it just feels so random. You know what I mean? Like how some stuff can get out there and some stuff can't, and why, I don't know. But basically, I think that the way I ultimately ended up getting published is that I created this very strange anthology, which was like my swan song to academia. It was called The Messy Self. I don't recommend you go find it. It's a very weird volume, but it was about, in a way, it was about my dissertation topic and the nature of the messy self. And I asked very interesting people to please write articles or anything, write essays, poems, a treatise, a play, anything about the nature of the messy self. And I asked amazing people like Tom Stoppard and Stephen Sondheim, and I asked all kinds of people, just people I thought would say something really interesting. And not all of those people agreed to send me anything, but a lot of people did, and I got very cool things. And even though it doesn't hang together really that well, one of the writers said you should try to make this like a commercially, popular book. And so she said, why don't you contact my agent and see what happens? So she gave me the name of her agent, and I told her this thing, and the woman wrote back and she's like, yeah, no, it's not going to be a popular book or something. But then I said, well, I've been working on this memoir, and I just kind of wondered, I kind of threw it in as a secondary thing. It wasn't even the primary reason I was in touch with her. And she said, oh, there's an agent in my office who might love this. And so we sent it to her, and she took it. So it was a bit on the magical side compared to the stories that we all know of sending it to 90 agents and no one wants, this is the real typical case, the one where you try and everyone says no for some reason, and then finally whatever. But so that woman, that agent, took my memoir, and she was able to sell my memoir. But honestly, then when my first novel was being written, we had a lot of disagreements about it, so we ended up parting ways. And so it's always a journey. It's not straightforward, I don't think.
Right. Yeah. Who are some of your biggest influences in the writing world?
I think I know that Anthony Doerr is one of my biggest influences. I just love his like sentence by sentence beauty.
Yes.
Like there's something about his work that really talks to me. I've been really moved by work by Nicole Krauss. And I really also, there are certain novels, you know what I mean? Like I just loved, I loved All the Light We Cannot See. I loved Nickel Boys. That was a heavy novel, but it was just amazing. And there's just that was Colson Whitehead's book. And I don't know. I think Toni Morrison has been a big influence. I think that Marilyn Robinson, because she really focuses on everydayness and ordinariness, and that's been very important to me. So for instance, when you said I pick these big themes, it's really true that I do have big themes, but on the other hand, the child's life in Once We Were Home is really like about whittling that little flute and then sitting while turning your spinning top while listening to the story. Like it's really much more day to day and maybe quotidian. You know what I mean? Even though big things are happening in history, sometimes in your life, it's not like that. It's really ordinary. And I mean, not always, but it's very important to be like, what happened on that moment? And it was just that you were having some cucumber soup. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I love cucumber soup.
Is that a thing? I don't know.
I think, yes, I think I've had it before. I'm a vegetarian, so I always look for soups like that.
Yeah, it's kind of refreshing, right? Anyway.
Or cucumber in drinks and cocktails is wonderful as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, an aside.
Yeah. I think I find different writers at different moments to kind of give me what I'm looking for, I think. Like it's been you know what I mean? Like there'll be people who I'm a little bit obsessed with. Like I was obsessed with The Song of Achilles. I thought that a novel was so amazing, so beautiful. Madeline Miller. And, I think it's like certain things just, they speak to you at that moment. And maybe has to do with what you're working through also, but somehow they hit a note, and so it shifts. But those I'm very I don't know, proud to call my influences. Yeah,
absolutely. So do you have any rituals associated with your writing? Do you do anything that preps you for writing? I know that you sit down and touch the copy, but do you do, actually, let me reframe this question. That's the real question I want to ask you is, what is it that feeds your writing more than anything else? Is there anything that you do or anything that has, that you make a regular part of your life that you think feeds your writing or heightens it in a way that's important, more so than just the other things in daily life?
I know, because I was just thinking of these daily things. Like, I'm really slow in the morning. I mean, and probably it would be better if I was like a get up early and get to work person, but I don't do that. Mostly because I have insomnia. So I don't want to get
Hmm.
up early because I'm only finally sleeping between 6 a.m.
Is
and
it because
9
you're
p.m.
a writer that you have the insomnia, or have you always had it?
I don't know. I don't know why I have it really. It's been something for bunch of years now, but um, and sometimes it's
Does your writing go with you? I mean, in other
yeah.
words,
I mean, I was gonna
okay,
say
you go to the
sometimes I
grocery
get up
store and
at
shop and it's still on your mind. It's incubating.
yeah. So sometimes if I'm up at 4 a.m., I'll just go to my office and try to work a little because why not? I mean, I'm up anyway. But mostly I kind of get up late and then I have a nice breakfast and then I settle down. So yeah, it feels kind of ordinary. Like there's not some crazy thing. I mean, for a while I was jumping on a trampoline and I thought that was exciting and kind of jarring up, like jostling up all the
Hmm.
jostling up all the material, but I'm not sure. And right now, I looked over and my trampoline's covered in my books. Right, I got to get those off if I want to get back
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, get
On
back to
that.
bouncing.
Yeah, yeah. So
So, the let me ask you this question. I often ask guests this question. If you could go back in time and meet your 25-year-old self, what would you tell the 25-year-old Jennifer Rosner?
yeah, sometimes I think I would tell her, don't go do that PhD in philosophy. Go to the writing program.
Mm.
I because the thing is, I love the craft of writing. I really like. I haven't studied it formally in the sense of I didn't get an MFA mostly because I felt like I had already done a lot of education. But um, I I I might have really loved that. I don't know. I guess I don't, as I said, I don't know. And philosophy really does definitely play a role in my writing all the time. And,
But you
like,
wouldn't necessarily have if you were could do it over, you
yeah.
would have gone into the writing program
I
rather than
think I would have.
philosophy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. Because even though, like, it has been very enriching to think about a lot of these philosophical questions, I think I could have done that and been in a writing. I might have found a different path that I would have loved more and felt more nourished by. Because I think that philosophy is a very critical enterprise, and academia is a critical enterprise, and a lot of the time you're trying to find the flaw in the argument. And you know what I mean? It's like that kind of mindset and not always in such a, it's not as collaborative and enriching and stuff. At least that was my experience.
So philosophy didn't live up to your expectations, is really what it sounds like. That it wasn't all you had hoped it would be, or you just found something stronger. But I mean, if it didn't live up to your expectations, you went all the way through to a PhD, which tells me that kind of that doggedness that you talked about, for instance, when you were working on your thesis or one of your
Yeah.
educational papers, is that kind of who you are? Is that part of your personality makeup,
Yeah.
or was at the time? And it
It
sounds like
always is.
just it
No, it
always is,
is. It
even
is. It
to
is.
the
This
day,
is
this
how the
day.
books get written. This is how the, because like you just have to persevere, I think. And I mean, I could have, it might have been wise maybe if I had found that it wasn't the healthiest choice for me, that I could have just stopped doing the philosophy program. But, it's funny. I have a friend who has sort of a sticker on their refrigerator and it says, no matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, turn back. And I think that's good advice.
It is good
But
advice.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, like I said, it gave me a lot, but I also feel like I might have flourished in another way too. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe there would be ways in which a writing route would have felt different and the work now would have felt different having gone through it. It's never, you never know. Like, I feel so lucky to have found writing, and I feel lucky that I get to write every day. I feel like that. And maybe if it had been like some career goal from the start, it would feel different. I don't know.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time because you've got a commitment, but I want to ask you one more question. That is, what's the most rewarding part of writing for you? Is there some aspect of it that you
Yeah.
find most rewarding?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I've really been aware of it lately because, you know, because right now I'm in this funny spot. Like I have a book that just came out. And so the part where you have a product in the world, that is not my favorite time. I mean, I love sharing my work and I hope people will go read Once We Were Home and The Yellow Bird Sings and all the other things. But it's sort of my position in the world and sort of placement where you have a book out and you're trying to, get it out there. That's not my favorite thing. And I think also like at the very beginning of a new project, when you don't really have traction is also a very uncomfortable place for me where I just feel like I'm not really sure. And I feel like, so I really weirdly, I think like the middle where I'm just writing. Like that's it. I mean, there's no product, there's not like, but there's also like, you still have enough traction that you're really have something like that's up and running. And then it's just like working through the actual story and the characters and the trajectories. And, like I love that part, the real like middle. So I don't know if that's really uncommon. I think it might be. I think some
I think it
people
might be. Yeah, it may be. I haven't heard that before, so I don't really know. Um, so you've got this event tonight that you need to be at. Is it writing related? Does it have to do with your?
It is. I'm giving an author talk in a couple towns down. Um, yeah, actually at the JCC of all places in Springfield, Mass. So I'm just presenting Once We Were
Springfield,
Home.
Massachusetts. I've been there. Basketball Hall of Fame. I've been
Exactly. The
there.
Basketball
Yeah.
Hall of Fame is
Is
there.
where's your hometown? Is it Springfield?
No, we live up at near Amherst in Leverett, Mass.
But where'd
So,
you grow up?
oh, I grew up in Connecticut,
You did. Okay.
but we've lived in the Northampton Amherst area for quite a while. Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time and talking about what an interesting life you've lived. You really have. And now you're committing it to books for people to read. I wish you best of luck with the new novel and the one that you're working on. And again, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you. Thanks so much for talking. It was my pleasure to be here.